Hello, and welcome to this curious event brought to you by the Royal Society of Edinburgh. I'm your host, Kate Rudy, Fellow of the FRSE and also its curator. And in this hour, we will satisfy some of your curiosity about Charles Lyell, who was a pivotal figure in the development of earth and life sciences in the 19th century. His contemporaries esteemed him highly, with Charles Darwin even writing that, quote, "The science of geology is enormously indebted to Lyle, more so, as I believe, than to any other man who ever lived." It's quite an endorsement. So I'm very pleased that with me today to discuss Lyell's notebooks are Pamela Mcintyre, the archivist at the University of Edinburgh in charge of the Charles Lyell Project, and Professor Emeritus Charles Withers, former Ogilvy Chair of Human Geography at the University of Edinburgh and also Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Now, let's begin with you, Pamela. What can you tell us about the Charles Lyell collection?
So, hi, Kate, and hi, everyone. So it's actually a team of people, all bringing different skills to help catalogue, preserve and make accessible the collection. So some background. The Sir Charles Lyell collection is a sum of multiple accruals, which have coalesced at the University of Edinburgh over a span of almost 100 years. The first of these accruals was a collection of letters and notes gifted by Lady Lyle of Conordy to the Grant Institute of Geology, as well as select works from his library, copies of his published work, and off-prints received from other writers and researchers, which feature its own indexes and marginal annotations, and that was in 1927. And these papers and books were then transferred from the Grant Institute to the care of the University of Edinburgh Special Collections and Library in 1960 and 1975. And then, supported by over 1,100 other leading institutions, groups, and individual people, the University of Edinburgh led a successful campaign in 2019 to acquire Lyell's 294 notebooks. And in 2020, the remaining papers of Sir Charles Lyell were allocated to the university under the UK's acceptance in lieu of inheritance tax. So additionally, the university has also acquired other records in auctions, for example, more letters, an album of letters and portraits, thanks to the Friends of the National Libraries and the Friends of Edinburgh University Library. So a long history with the Lyell family and with various different deposits and accruals, as well as the university having its own geological department records. So these paper records are complemented by a collection of geological, shell and fossil specimens that were collected by Lyle and his wife Mary, which are held by the University of Edinburgh's Coburn Geological Museum and in other institutions in the UK. And in fact, current work is ongoing at the Coburn, revealing more specimens that are maybe Lyell related. So that collection is potentially growing. And each element of the collection represents a significant resource for researching and understanding the work of Sir Charles Lyell. Brought together as a whole, the collection offers a comprehensive view of the methods in which he worked, his travel and observations, his network of correspondence, his editorial process, his public lectures and plans and notes, and the way in which he formed his ideas and thinking, which inform so much of our understanding of the world today. But today, we are going to focus on the notebooks, and there are actually 5 series of notebooks. There's a list of the types of notebooks that we've got. There's actually 5 series. There's scientific notebooks from 1825 to 1874. There's 266 volumes of them. There's daily and travel journals from 1818 to 1830, so slightly earlier, and there's 6 volumes of them. There's manuscripts notes from 1855 to 1861, and there's 7 volumes of them. There's 2 volumes that specifically look at Madeira and the Canary Islands, and there are index notebooks, which appear to be indexes to the off-prints. And there's 16 volumes of them, which kind of gives you an idea of the volume of the off-prints. So there's 294 in total, and they're all very similar. They're all about A5 size. They're packed with ideas, observations, drawings, and perhaps things you wouldn't expect. For example, there's a photograph in there. In fact, there's a couple of photographs in there. His wife Mary's writing is in there. there are lists of what he wants to take with him on his travels, providing us with a clearer picture of how he worked. He also took the notebooks with him. He asks questions, he lists local contacts, he jumps from topic to topic. The notebooks have been the focus of most of our work to date. We are cataloguing them, they are being digitised, they have been conserved, and we want to share today what we've learned about them. And today we're going to concentrate on the scientific and the manuscript notebooks. So in terms of cataloguing and digitisation, Lyell's administration, so his own labelling, the page numbering and the indexing of the notebooks has really helped us. These elements were designed by Lyle to facilitate his use, his searching, how he can find references again. And we can use this framework to help us. For example, digitisation really requires every page to be numbered. And the pages are already numbered by Lyle. So any mistakes in the page numbering are his. And as for cataloguing, we've developed processes that use the index Lyle created to create a catalogue entry. So we're able to use his indexes the same way as he has. The indexes are really interesting actually, and he uses the notebooks to express, well, some of the notebooks he uses to express his thoughts on a topic, sometimes using flowing prose to articulate a thought or ask questions. And then he uses the index to precisely summarise this, producing a more concise expression. And an example of this is when he's talking in one of his manuscript notebooks about the evolution of species and reproduction of plants and how that can have similarities with other species. And the little concise entry in the index is, if an acorn remains undeveloped, an oak is never created. So is this evidence of him fine-tuning his thoughts as a tool, as an effective science communicator? I can imagine him using those prompts almost in his lectures. There's a lot to say, and there's a lot we can find out by studying just the indexes, and we'll come back to them. So just over 100 notebooks have a good detailed description, thanks to our previous project archivist, Elise Ramsey, and 101 of the notebooks have been digitised as of the 18th of July. So a lot's been done, but there's still a lot to do. And the digitisation is thanks to the university's Cultural Heritage Digitisation Service. And some of these are already available on the university's image website, which is Luna. And I think there's a link being added into the chat. And some of the catalogue is available. So I'm working on the back end version of the catalogue, but what's been done is already published. And I think there's a link that can go into the chat for that as well.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Pamela. Yeah, I see that the chat has the link to the Luna site where anybody can click on the images and see what you've digitized so far. So Charlie, what can you tell us about the significance of these notebooks? Why should we care about these notebooks?
Thanks, Kate, and thanks, Pamela, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, why should we be curious about Lyell's notebooks? And more importantly, perhaps, what was Lyle curious about? And in answer to the second question, the answer is just about everything when it comes to Earth history. And I'm going to say something about his notebooks in detail in a moment. They are, without doubt, one of the most important, one of the most precious scholarly resources for the earth sciences. Indeed, if not for the sciences as a whole in the 19th century, extraordinarily important for the reasons that Pamela said. Manuscript notebooks written by Lyle between 1818 and 1874 in one stripe or another, his scientific notebooks from 1825. And I'll come to something of their detail and indeed their importance in just a moment. But in order to stress that importance, I want, as it were, to kind of skip a phase ahead. That is to say, we often tend to consider the importance of science and scientists from the printed, published product. That is the book that is, if you will, the kind of final thing in which they encapsulate their thoughts. And for Lyle, of course, it's not his only book, but it's probably his most important. His Principles of Geology, published in 3 volumes between 1830 and 1833, encapsulates his attempt to lay down, as he puts it, the philosophical foundations for geology, what is then an emergent science. The book is published in 3 volumes, as I say, by John Murray in London between 1830 and 1833. Now, in its principles, what Lyle is attempting to do is lay down the philosophical foundations for what is becoming geology as an emergent science. And he makes efforts, and I'll use his words here, to explain the former changes of the Earth's surface by reference to causes now in operation. But simply, the present is the key to the past. And this philosophical foundation to what is becoming geology depends, in Lyell's reasoning, upon the idea of a vera causa, the idea of a true cause. This, in part, he's drawing from Dougal Stewart, he's drawing from Thomas Reid. Indeed, in some senses, he's drawing from Isaac Newton. He's, in a sense, also drawing from the deductive thinking of James Hutton. But in drawing in this way and in looking for a vera causa, he depends in his argument for the basic laws of nature not changing over time, the kinds of causes not to change over time, and for the degree of them not to change over time. And this really is a set of assumptions. Uniformity of law, kind, and degree has to be assumed, Lyle argues in his principles, to make geology scientific. Hence, principles. It's about philosophical foundations to what is becoming geology as a set of practices. Differences are held over the age of the Earth. And most importantly, of course, as I think we need to remember, there are very firmly held different opinions about the implications of a deeper time Earth history in Lyell's time. And Lyle is deepening considerably what have been hitherto kind of scriptural interpretations of the age of the Earth. Science understood as procedures, then all the kind of language we use at the moment, verification, standardization, experimentation, and so forth, is all up for grabs. The emergence of a kind of philosophical method within science at the moment. And another point to make by way of background, I am coming to the notebooks, but this is important, is that science is becoming public. It's becoming public in two senses. One, it's apparent in, for example, the British Association for the Advancement of Science, founded in 1831. Its annual peripatetic meetings are, if you like, sort of festivals of science. Science as a form of polite civic culture is very much to the fore in Lyell's day. And the second point to make is that there's a growing scientific literacy. The public is aware of what's going on. They're incredibly interested in fossils, in the implications of a deeper time. And of course, Lyle speaks to this, but he also, Murray, also produces cheaper versions of many scientific books. There are scientific periodicals that start to appear, cheaper versions of Lyell's book, and so on. So what's the point of all of that? My point is this, that the notebooks are absolutely vital to understanding the earlier stages of Lyell's thinking, to understanding how he went about his ideas, to understanding with whom he was in correspondence. Don't look at science, as it were, in terms of its finished products. Look at it as a process of thinking through, and that's what the notebooks are all about. Notebooks, well, what are notebooks? Are they a guide to memory? Notebooks are a guide to memory, of course. We write things down in order that we don't forget them. So the notebook image we have here, and I'll ask Pamela to enlarge the right-hand side of that whilst I talk, if I might. This is Lyell's notebook 22, Italy 1828, 1829. Now, Lyle, we know, was engaged in a variety of important sort of geological site examinations in Italy in 1828 and then 1829. Enlarge it maybe a wee bit more, actually, Pamela. Yeah, keep going. But we all of us write things down, though we might not do it in notebook form. Shopping lists, a to-do list. We're going on holiday. Have you cancelled the milk? Have you got the passports ready? All of these things, in terms of writing down, are a prompt to action. Notebooks, then, as a particular form of inscription in the field as a prompt to action. Lyle is here in Italy in 1828, 1829, page 131 of notebook 22. But what he's doing is not talking about the geological sites that he's interested in, but talking and writing about how other people have interpreted Earth's history. He's interested in here in the Roman Catholic Church's view of what he says in about line 6 or 7 of the right-hand page here, page 131, the figurative, not literal sense of the Earth's history. That is, in a sense, he's offering, if you like, a kind of wider and more flexible interpretation of a scriptural account of the age of the Earth. So whilst he's engaged, of course, in examining geological specimens, he's also turning to other forms of evidence, here written evidence, monastic evidence, as it happens, where often in the title deeds of monasteries, many people are interested in the destruction of the world. They write about volcanoes, they write about earthquakes. For Lyle, of course, this is part of Earth's causal processes, the present as the key to the past, but he's also interested in the ways other people have interpreted this. So he's desperately curious, not just about geological specimens and rock sites, so to say. To the side, to the image in what is not a good day for Lyell's handwriting, let's be honest. This is not a good example of a scientific notebook in the field. He also makes remarks about Pierre-Simon Laplace. Now, Pierre-Simon Laplace, the French natural philosopher, the 5th volume of his Celestial Mechanics comes out in 1825, and it may be that Lyle is here drawing, if you like, inspiration. What's Laplace saying about questions of cause in the natural world? Moving towards laws almost. But Laplace is one of those people who, with Lyle, is interested in what contemporaries call tidology, the influence of tides, the relative disposition of tides, the heights of tides, tidal range as we would have it. And Laplace also writes a very interesting essay in 1814 about causal determinism. So here's Lyle, not having a great day in terms of clear writing, storing things through. Was this written at the dinner table? We don't know. Was it, on a moving carriage, even on horseback? But he's speculating not about the geological features, but about other people's interpretations. So notebooks become, if you like, a kind of guide to memory, crucially to write things down. If you don't write them down, you can't later write them up. If you can't write them down and later write them up, you might as well write it off. Notebooks are also crucial, of course, when you come home, when you're back, as it were, in the study, when he or she is back. Well, again, think of this in one's own experience. Field notebooks are often, field work of whatever sort, is limited by time, it's limited by money, it's limited by weather, it's limited by a whole number of things. But when you're back in the study, you can think again as to the significance of what it is you've written down. You can, if you like, turn to make further observations. It's in the study that the notebook becomes a basis to reflection, it becomes an aggregative document, and Lyle will write over what he's earlier thought about and earlier written. And in part, you might say he's doing this, excuse me, in Italy in the late 1820s. But there are also picture books. Lyell's notebooks are sketchbooks. Many scientists drew the scene, that is to say, not necessarily with an accurate artistic representation in mind, but in order to kind of provide a stylistic, diagrammatic representation of the thing that they're thinking about, or even perhaps the relative size of the features, the relative distribution of the key features. Now, I think in modern terms, I think we've got a reasonably good understanding of what geology and the earth sciences visual language is. We can understand maps, we understand scientific diagrams, we're familiar with the contour, we're familiar perhaps with the idea of a geological column as a kind of visual shorthand for the relative stratigraphy and relative chronology of rocks. But in Lyell's day, these things were fairly new. They're being, if you like, presented as a new form of stylistic representation. So here, the second of the notebook illustrations, this is not Italy 1828, but much closer to home in Scotland. This is Arran, August 1836, notebook 62, page 63. And on the right-hand side, top of the images you can see is in what our terms we would understand as a sketch representation of Lyell thinking through igneous intrusions. So the very top of this page, in the sort of almost layer cake exemplification, he's thinking through what the, if you like, processual consequences of granitic intrusions are to the country rock, to the old red sandstone, and to the trap rock. And in the accompanying text, beneath the illustrations here on Arran, between the diagrams CC as it's labeled on the sketch, he's asking questions about what this might mean. But in addition to thinking about the Arran exposure, he's also thinking about where he's seen comparable examples. So the sketchbook, the sketch in the notebook becomes a means to comparative thinking. It becomes a means to compare site one with another. He uses the examples in Brora and also in Angus as he's thinking about these several type sites. whilst he's thinking about this, interestingly, Mary, his wife, is collecting seashells on the seashore. So it's a kind of combined effort, but they're doing different things whilst Lyle is sketching in this way. Another point to make about notebooks and why we should be so curious about Lyell's notebooks is that we have to remember his is a world. Remember when they start, 1818, his travel and tourist notebooks, 1825, his scientific notebooks, and then the last one is in the autumn of 1874. This is a world for Lyell and his contemporaries without the telephone, without the computer, without World Wide Web, without TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and all else. How absolutely glorious. But my point is, more generally, that we mustn't think of this as a world without social media, and Lyell's social media was twofold. The first and important, when of course it could be easily affected, either at the meetings of the British Association or in John Murray's drawing room in London, was conversation, talking one to another, exchanging views. And Lyell's notebooks often have notes about conversation, but the more important social medium with which Lyell is engaged is the letter. Letter writing is a hugely important part of being and becoming a scientist. Who might help with that query? Who might help explain this igneous intrusion that he's seen on Arran? Who's just published a book on related topics and so could be written to in thanks and in admiration? Or, and this of course would require a completely different epistolary convention, who's written a book with whom you disagree profoundly and you want to say so, but to do so in very polite terms, in the conventions of gentlemanly and scholarly exchange in the 19th century. Do you really think so? My data, my specimens, my evidence suggests something entirely different. So that's why Lyell offers, if you like, words into vanished worlds. This is not just about geological exposures and their significance for Earth history. This is a world of gentlemanly, and very largely it was gentlemanly, exchange. Epistolary convention was crucial to how you transmitted your concerns about science in one way or another. So the notebooks are complex things. The notebooks are working documents for Lyell. They are, if you like, aggregative things. He adds to what is earlier written and earlier drawn. And I'll come to one last illustration at this point. Lyell is keen throughout his work, and this is absolutely crucial to his notebooks as to the later versions, later editions of his Principles of Geology, about the capacity to explain climate change. So he talks, again, his phrase, of a grand new theory of climate. In essence, he's interested in the long-term climatic changes associated with the changing balance between land and water, the Earth's physical geography, as he puts it. So that's why in his notebooks, he's curious about chemistry. He's curious about chemistry because the Earth's temperature and rates of cooling are absolutely crucial to explaining variations in the Earth's history over time. He's absolutely curious about biology, although the term has not yet properly been invented, plants and animals, zoogeography, if you will, because of the importance of temperature to life, to what we now call biodiversity. He's absolutely curious about geographical distribution as a key element of thinking about this grand new theory of climate. And in a way, why we should be curious about his notebooks is because Lyell, in his notebooks to his principles and in his other published writing, is converting a first nature, seeing it, thinking about it, into a second nature, into something that is publicly available. And in this shift from first to second nature is a kind of archival shift, a point to which I'll end on a moment. The next illustration is the one that I think you have in front of you now, which is a letter, excuse me, from Charles Lyell to Charles Darwin, November the 24th, 1860. Now, if this can be expanded, can you just make it a wee bit larger, Pamela, as I talk? Go back to my point about the physical geography. Yep, we're just zooming in as we go in.
Left or right, please?
Just page 160, page 60 on the right-hand side. What Lyle is writing to Darwin about here, page 40, beg your pardon, on the 24th of November 1860, is what, to use modern terms, we call isostatic rebound and uplift. In other words, when the ice retreats, when ice melts, when glaciers go, the continental land masses on which they sit rebound. They rise up vertically. So there's a balance then between tide and the land mass. But there's also an issue, and Lyle is here thinking about this. What happens to the water that runs off, the meltwater? Glacial meltwater has, if you like, a kind of capacity. It has energy to carry sediment, and that sediment is then deposited. So Lyle is here asking Darwin, what do you think? Should we standardize the rate of glacial meltwater outflow? Are we thinking about the rate of isostatic rebound? He doesn't use that term because it's not yet been invented, but this, if you like, geographical vertical distribution of land in relation to water. Should we think about this in standard terms? Now he's thinking about the Northern Eurasian landmass, but he's also using Scottish examples. Letter writing, absolutely vital. You couldn't pick up the phone, you couldn't send an email, you would have to wait for a letter. And of course, in this period, as John Murray, Lyle's publisher, said, there were often as many as 3 posts a day in urban areas. And Murray would often say, I received yours by the 3rd post, shall attend to it straightway. And of course, often did. So letter writing and the response to receiving a letter, vital. And Lyle's notebooks are absolutely crucial in this respect. So to end, why we should be interested and curious about Lyle's notebooks? Well, they're in an archive, absolutely in an archive, and being attended to by professionals there. But his notebooks are an archive. They're an archive of his emerging and changing thoughts and the thoughts of others over almost half a century. And I think the point that I want to end with before handing back to Pamela is that Lyle and his contemporaries understood that the Earth was its own geological archive. That he refers at one point, in a later addition to his principles, he writes, at every moment of past time, nature has added a page to her archives. And what Lyle's notebooks are doing, and what he is doing in his notebooks, is interpreting that archival evidence that the Earth has left of itself.
Fantastic. I love this idea of the Earth as an archive that you can go and rifle through the big card catalog of Glenn Tilt and so forth. It's wonderful. So I wonder, Pamela, could you talk a bit about the conservation efforts that the project is undertaking in order to make this material accessible, make this archive accessible, and also to preserve it for the future?
So yes, you're absolutely right, Kate. These vanished worlds and curiosity would come to nothing unless the records were actually, preserved and for the future and for future use. So thanks to the external funding of the National Manuscripts Conservation Trust and others, the Lyle project has been fortunate to have an expert project conservator, Claire Hutchison, whose work has really helped us to understand the anatomy of the notebooks. And sadly, Claire can't be here today, so I'm actually going to be talking through her work on her behalf. But in my own voice, so I'm not sure I can answer any technical conservation questions, but I'm hoping that it will give you a flavour. Claire's work covered the whole collection, so that includes everything, the printed books, the correspondence, and included some of the specimens from the Coburn Museum as well. And Claire managed 2 interns, Joanne Fulton and Sarah McLean, to complete this project in 6 months. She did so well. And the number and the uniformity of the notebooks and Claire's close observation of them has really helped us get to know them. And so now we want to talk about the anatomy really of those notebooks. Firstly, it appears that Lyle took a consistent approach in the choice and the type of notebooks, such as the size, and probably the book binder that he's bought them from, although I don't know who that is. And he used identical notebooks in succession, likely bought in a pile, and they may have been commissioned for his use. So you can see there's a gold 213, might be a record, an evidence that he's asked for that, but it's not sure, and it's quite rare. Nearly all have hollow spines, which allow for greater flexibility. The majority of them are leather bound with a sprinkling of cloth ground. Only one or two of them are marbled paper, and these are actually index books, so not technically kind of working notebook. So it's the materials of the notebooks that allow for a lot of manipulation. They were slim, the cloth and the leather are flexible. However, they are very sturdy and they have lasted exceptionally well if you consider their age and their use. So we've noticed Lyell's administrative support created around the notebooks already. He's numbered every notebook and every page within it. But Claire's observation has confirmed he's also added in extra pages, he's glued in pages, he's sewed in pages and torn out pages, and he's added in labels. So there's a real sense of him working and grappling with them, numbering them and using them. So, and this is all evidence of Charles Lyell. So let's consider the labels. You can see here there's a good range of different kinds of labels. Lyle attached labels to the top of the spines, and these were definitely bits of scraps of paper attached with animal glue. And Claire and I often had a chat about animal glue and how traveling with animal glue would be possible, and how many animal glue related incidents were there in the back of a carriage, or in a, you know, it seems to be quite a kind of, you know, weird thing to carry about with it. So, but the labels are vulnerable as they can and have come off. So they are vulnerable for that reason. And you can see these ones here. So these are, imagine the notebooks are numbered 1 to 266 and in chronological age. So these ones are 40s. These are kind of quite fairly on early in, and you can see that these ones have been used and were quite shredded. And they have the potential to flick off. And you know, some of them obviously have come off. So Claire has carefully reattached these using EVA glue, which is a conservation version of PVA, because the notebooks now are going to be consulted by other people and visitors to the CRC and maybe displayed. So it's really important that their stability and their preservation is now kind of stable and secure, because they are potentially going to be used by other people. And Lyle was pretty consistent with his indexing, with improvements over time. So I've said before about the indexes. So there's a label that's coming off, and there's the label repaired. So very, very subtle repairs just to reinforce the integrity of the notebook. Yeah, so this is an example of his earliest form of indexing. And so Lyle trained originally as a lawyer, and he's using his lawyer training to support the administration of this. So he's spent some time on the circuit as a lawyer. He's used to working up notes. He's used to creating concise legal references, and he's applying the same kind of tools to his notebook strategy. So this is one of the early notebooks, and you can see from the list that it's mostly places that he's been. So, and the page number. So very much kind of solo geologizing. He's traveling and looking at things. So these proved actually to be quite a challenge for Claire, because he stuck a piece of paper onto the back of a leather notebook, and the leather is very smooth, and so it's got very little to nothing to cling to, and the animal glue originally used by Lyle to attach these pages had become very brittle. So there were instances where they had come apart and separated, and he's obviously wrapped this one around the edge as well, and you're in danger of losing actual references and page numbers in that instance. So you know, it's rubbed as it's come out and in of a coat or a bag or a library shelf, tightly packed with others. So I mean, these are old notebooks. So he's moved. This is notebook 36. So now he's actually started stitching in the index, and he's adding in using thick black thread, like Claire was saying. It's like the kind you'd sew a button on with, and you can see he's kind of like big, kind of confident stitches. It's not the most subtle way of additions, but they have held very well, which is what he wanted. So yeah, there is also some notebooks. This is notebook 141, 1846. This has got some red thread in as well. So he moves from the single page index to using index pages at the end of the notebook. So he gets better of indexing and using his indexes. He then also sticks in indexes as well. In 1851, he's got 3 smaller notebooks in Belgium, and he's glued them in sideways, which actually is a bit of a hurdle for Claire to repair about. So he's done this more than likely as the first method, which is gluing the page onto the back of the notebook, is proved too small in size to record all the contents and the details that he wanted. And as Charlie was saying, it's less about solo travel and observation, and it's more about asking questions, publishing at the same time, revisions, reviews, correspondence. And so he needs to then dedicate parts of the notebook specifically to an index.
That is so fascinating, Pamela. I mean, I think that the repairs that you've shown us really give us an insight into how he used them, that they were part of a push and pull. They were mutable. They were part of a thinking process. And as Charlie was saying earlier, not only do they record thought, but they record thought changing in time. And also his efforts to try to index things, to try to organize ideas so that he can come back to them over and over, which sort of appeals to somebody's sensibilities for changing opinions over time as you get more evidence. And I think that is, I mean, among other things, just listening to the two of you talk, it makes me want to keep better notebooks, index them better, and really worry about all of the electronic notes that we keep that are going to be lost to posterity.
Well, it maybe makes you want to take better care of notebooks in the field. You know, I mean, Claire has done the most wonderful job in conservation, as Pamela is suggesting. You have to remember, you know, these are things that kind of went in a haversack, got scratched alongside a geological hammer, you know, stuffed in a coat pocket, bent sideways. You know, the moment where Lyle is kind of thinking through his engagement with Laplace, and he scribbles all over it. You know, these are kind of working documents that were bent over a knee. Would have a wine glass balanced on the cover, and so on. You know, we mustn't think of them as they are precious scientific documents for all the reasons I've kind of outlined, but they were working things in the field and in the study and in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, so this, you can see from this slide that the spines have been, so the labeling and the admin and everything, that's Lyle retrieving the information, but the notebooks also can actually give a deeper view of how he's using them, and breaking the spines and wrapping them around themselves. So the spines have been manipulated, resulting in several splits. And this is a good image of Claire's, and that can happen as a result. So regardless of whether you've numbered every page, if you've got 2 111s and you don't know what notebook they come out from, it's very, very difficult. So potentially the manipulation of the spines can mean that pages can become detached. But
that raises a bit of a conservation problem, because the fact that they're detached is part of their use history, and you hate to put them back together again, because the fact that they've come out of their bindings is integral to their history and their utility.
Yes, it's very, very subtle. And even this, for example, this one here, which shows, you know, the corners being bashed, you know, as he's kind of thumbs through it, and it's been put in a bag. And you can see there the little kind of inside pages and how the leather's frayed away as well. So yeah, I mean, they're sturdy, but they've definitely been used. So they're the back of the notebooks are still very tight, and where spine repairs were needed, they required a minimal approach. So this is toned Japanese paper applied to fill the little gap, and the spine is hollow, so most of the spines were actually fine. But the number of these is quite interesting. There's an average of 3 of these required for every notebook. So he's really kind of manipulated them and used them. They couldn't use, Claire wasn't able to use wheat starch paste, which is the adhesive that they normally use for these inner joints, because Charles Lyell has used iron gall ink. So the ink is a really important component. Iron gall ink is notoriously difficult to deal with in paper conservation, as the ions leach into the paper, and you can see this. I think it's actually one of your notebook 22. You can see that it started to kind of leach away. It's not a big problem, but it will happen over time, and dependent on the ink recipe, it can even lead to the paper being eaten away completely by the ink, leaving a silhouette of the lettering only. So Claire, to be really careful with the types of adhesive that she used. And also, it's not just the ink, it's the pencils. So he's used graphite, and it is very, very soft. There's different kinds. Some of the pages that he uses in pencil are really, really light and actually quite difficult to see. And occasionally he's gone back over and added in ink keywords on that page. But what we've realized when the team were digitizing the notebooks, the graphite was coming off on the snake weights that we used to kind of again keep them stable in the cradle of the digitization camera. And so this has made us aware that when people are consulting the notebooks with the ones with the graphite, that graphite can shift. You can actually scrape into it, you could indent it, you could actually transfer it onto another page as well, and you could actually rub it off. So that's why it's really great that at the same time as the conservation and the cataloguing, we are digitizing collection, which will really open it up to different types of access. And finally, the other factor to consider in the repairs is the margins. There was no margins, so he's written right up to the edge here, which means that any kind of impacts on the side of the pages will impact on the actual notebooks. So once the active conservation was complete, Claire and her interns created some bespoke book shoes. Now, we all thought that we wanted more shoes. It's not, we want book shoes. And these are, they wrap around and tie at the top for every single 294 notebook. And then Claire has made these amazing book enclosures. So it subdivides the library into slightly smaller sections, but still keeps that integrity of a library feel. And again, it's really helps with access. And actually the book shoes create a layer of control as well, because everyone has to pause and take a moment to take the book shoe off and then consult the notebook. So absolutely full of admiration. So not only has she managed to conserve the notebooks, but picked up on really interesting points of detail as to their anatomy and how they were used.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So we have a few minutes for questions, And I urge everybody in the audience to type in questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have trouble with that, put your hand up or something, and I'll come and find you. But please type your questions into that Q&A chat box. And while those questions are coming in, I want to ask, so Charlie, if you could go back in time and hang out with Charles Lyell, pick him up at Carrymore and walk, I don't know, to Loch Brandy or to Glendale, or maybe off over Jocks Road and end up in Braemar. And if you had a good long walk with him in Angus, what would you want to know from him? What would you want to ask? What would you talk about?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think the young Lyle and the old Lyle might prompt different answers, or maybe I'd frame the questions differently. So recognizing that, yeah, three things I think. First of all, I'd want him to talk about his intellectual debt to James Hutton. Kind of what, if anything, did he draw from Hutton? What did he take in terms of procedure? Because if Principles is about the philosophical foundations for geology as an emergent science, and all of that in the 1820s and 30s and 40s, and the variant editions refined that. What does he do about what Geeky calls the Scottish School of Geology, which is Hutton 1785 to Jameson 1825, that 40-year period before Lyell's Principles, a kind of key moment. What does Lyle owe to Hutton? Does he consciously draw upon him? Does he go to the same sites and think, yeah, Hutton's got that right, got that wrong? So that's the first thing. The second, and we've partly mentioned her, and I really think she's so crucial to Lyell's kind of life and doing work as a scientist, is Mary, his wife. I want to know kind of what he owes her. Is she kind of a sounding board for his thinking? Did they discuss things over the breakfast table? She's collecting seashells, but do they end up at his collection? The relationship between husband and wife is not one of husband and wife. I think in some senses, it's between two equals who are doing different things. So, tell me about Mary, how she thinks about these things. And I suppose the third, and it's impossible, but it would be lovely, of course, I'd like to hear Lyle talk. I'd like, not, is he speaking with a Canardy accent? Because as a London trained lawyer, that will have been beaten out of him. But I suppose what I mean is, Jim Secord, the very distinguished historian of geology, has written about what he calls shop talk amongst scientists. What was appropriate to say and how you said it. So rhetoric is, both written and spoken, is absolutely crucial to the promotion of science as kind of public discourse. We know what Lyle, kind of how he feels about his contemporaries. We know what he is trying to write to his several fellows, but what did he say in private about them? Betray a secret. Let us know what you really think. And I suppose I would like to have heard him lecture. Did he have the same precision, the same kind of legal precision to his spoken diction as he did to his writing? But just hearing him talk as we walked up, the Larry Grew or something would just be such fun.
I mean, that is interesting to think about the debt he might owe to Hutton. I mean, did he go to Sicker Point and think about the layers going this way and that? Did he retrace the steps of Hutton across Scotland, for example? I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but maybe.
Well, he certainly visits some of the sites, but whether or not he visits them, as it were, with a copy of Theory of the Earth in hand, I don't know. And I've not been through his notebooks in sufficient detail to say that he's kind of revisiting with the intention of either confirming, correcting, or extending a Huttonian view. I suppose what I meant was, in as much as his book Principles is kind of a theoretical, I'm using the term loosely, but kind of a theoretical disposition, as indeed was Hutton's title to his book. How much did he consciously draw upon that as kind of support of his view as to what geology should become.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, we have some questions to turn to, but I would love to know at some point whether Mary also left notebooks, or whether we see evidence of Mary's thought in Charles's notebooks. That would be interesting to see. But let's move on. Maybe you can answer that, but I also want to get to the audience's questions. Kathryn Emmett writes, could you say something about the difficulties of interpreting and transcribing the handwriting in these notebooks? I mean, you've just shown us the handwriting. I saw something about Fife and something about various places, Forfar. But the handwriting, it is difficult to transcribe handwriting that's 200 years old. What can you tell us about that process?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's really difficult. So it's obviously paleography skills, which, you know, are partly learned, but often, you know, you can either do it or you can't. But the University of Edinburgh have also been working and investigating other forms of online platforms. So they had done a big SLIC resource discovery fund bid and looked at doing different, it's called an editor project, and they looked at different examples. And Transcribus with a K is something that project archivist Elise Ramsey picked up, and she has used it really, really effectively. So you train the Transcribus model to recognise Charles Lyell's handwriting. You can find it online. There's a light version, and generally anybody can use it if they have a document that they're struggling to read. And there's existing models on the platform that you can use that will probably work and help you confirm the tricky bits. So Transcribus is something that we are going to, I need to restart. I started in mid-Jan. So it's something that we're definitely going to go back to. And what we'll probably do is use the Transcribus platform to address the indexes, and then the actual pages. There's something like 47,000 actual pages in the notebooks. So that will maybe need another type of a large-scale project like Zooniverse. So that's kind of what we're thinking with that. I actually answered a question, sorry, I saw it and I just said, Jason says, thanks for an insightful presentation. Any direct evidence of blood, sweat or tears in the notebooks? I can say no, thankfully no. Yeah, you never know. You can always expect weird and wonderful things in an archive. But
the blood and sweat and tears is coming from the archivists who are dealing with it.
Definitely my tears. Yeah, there's been nothing like that, which is amazing when you think where he had them, you know, and Mount Etna and all that, and those different places. And there's no wine stain marks or anything like that at all.
I've just been studying blood stains in surgical manuscripts from the 14th century. Lots of blood in books, but that's a different story altogether. Timothy Feddick writes, he's wondering about the metrics of.
Yes, Timothy, hi.
So does his rate of use change over time? Does he using lots more in his 30s and fewer when he's getting older?
Yeah. That's a really, really good question, and it's something that I haven't done yet. So that's a research topic for sure. Every time I look at them, I see something more. And I'm actually thinking about starting at the end now and doing from 266 backwards, because the first set have been done. So I can't answer that question, Timothy, but yes, it could be a good one. It definitely will reveal results for sure.
Yeah. Sandra asks whether the notebooks mention women very often. We were just talking about Mary and whether she appears directly or indirectly in them. It sounds like there's a
dissertation
to be written about
definitely
women in geology in Scotland.
Come to us, come to us with your dissertation ideas, because it's only through doing that little research, that little kind of focused research, that we find more. So Lyle does mention and refer to local people helping him and pointing out sites that other people who he's retracing their steps haven't seen. So he's definitely talking to local people and guides. He doesn't say if they're male or female. He is then also mentioning women. There's women in there that he's mentioning. There's a Madam Nulu that he's mentioning. I don't know who that is, and when I Google that name, I can't find anything. So there are one or two mentions. They'll be in there, but in the main, it's male geologists that he's corresponding, scientists that he's corresponding with.
So I have one more question for both of you in sequence. So after studying these notebooks and looking at them and thinking about them, how has it changed the way that you walk around Scotland? I mean, do you feel like you're carrying some of the ideas with you, either the idea of looking for igneous intrusions and pebbles that you find, or noticing, thinking about the rates of ice melt, or how does it affect the way your imagination as you're being out?
Totally blown my mind. It's totally blown my mind, because I'm not a geologist, I'm not from a geology background. It has totally, I mean, the idea of the time frame that he was thinking about, it's amazing. So yeah, it's totally changed how I'm walking about. And I went to Arran camping recently, and I was totally freaked out by the geology, which, you know, is there all the time, but looking at it in a completely great new light. What about you?
No, it does. I mean,
Yeah.
just looking at the notebooks, my first reaction to the notebooks is a kind of wow. I mean, an almost visceral sense that someone whose work and words, you know, you study in abstract when you do the history of geology or visit these sites, that's what he was writing about. You know, it's not a kind of at once to make an affirmation about these things. Science is a process of making hesitant steps forward and then sometimes a retreat and so on. So I think about, you know, the kind of hard work that Lyle and others have done. And another is actually, it's a kind of sense as to how wonderful it is that these things have survived. And gosh, you know, what else has not survived that would provide, in a sense, a kind of comparable record? Maybe not of the stature of Lyell's, of course, he is such a significant figure for all the reasons we've discussed. But you know, the very fact that they are there now, well, actually some of them on the trolley behind, and you know, in the archive, and they were held in Canody and they were kept, and Lyle was cautious about keeping them as a record of his own thinking. You know, that to me is a kind of, that's where you stop and think about the contingencies of historical research, really.
Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you to Pamela Mcintyre, to Charles Withers, to Charlie Withers for this really, really interesting and moving talk. It makes me want to, I don't know, spend equal amounts of time in the hills and in the archives, which is maybe how we, that sounds like a good life anyway. Yeah. So thanks so much for this fascinating presentation. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Very much.